Welcome, my name's Federico Re and this is InspireTalkTV. And in this episode, we are looking at how do you create a sustainable business as seen through the eyes of a sports business leader. And joining me today is another very distinguished guest, Jeremy Loeliger. How are you, Jeremy?
I'm very well, Federico. Thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure and an honour to have you part of the show. So Jeremy, I guess getting right into it in terms of what does it take to create a sustainable business, I'd like to sort of look at the history of the NBL and really understand its origins and the journey that it's taken to get to where it is today. Obviously a very successful league, not just in Australia, but also it has a reputation internationally as being one of the best leagues in the world. So I guess take us back to the early days of where the NBL started and I guess where it is today in terms of the success.
Sure. It's a checkered history, Federico. We are very proud that this coming season will be our 40th consecutive season of the NBL. So it makes us one of the, if not the oldest national sporting league in Australia in terms of consecutive seasons played, which is pretty exciting, but it hasn't always been a great success. I guess the NBL reached its pinnacle in the late 80s and early 90s, and everyone remembers it as the golden era of Andrew Gaze and his cohort and his peers. And it was a fantastic time for Australian basketball. But the reality of the situation is that in this most recent season, we've broken most of the records that were set back then in terms of peak attendance and average attendance and TV viewership. So look, we're well on our way to recapturing the heights of where the National Basketball League was in the 80s and 90s, but there was a pretty gloomy period of 15 years there in between where the landscape really fell into a lull. I think the sport had been caught flat-footed as the popularity of the NBA perhaps declined here for a time in Australia. And that happened to coincide with AFL, NRL, other, let's say, Indigenous Australian sports really starting to understand the public, ramping up their marketing capabilities and innovation and engaging with their fan base at a time when really basketball had been probably too reliant on the popularity of the NBA here in Australia. But the key thing for us, I guess, is that we know what success looks like. We know that basketball here has a huge following. It's the second most participated sport in the country. It's the second most popular sport in the world. And we've got a lot of competitive advantages that set us apart from, I guess, the rest of the sporting landscape here in Australia.
Sure. So look, you've obviously got an impressive track record of success, there's no doubt about that. But today, in this current era, well, let's call it the 21st century, to be a world ranking league does require a certain business methodology or structure or foundation, and obviously you're very much part of that. You joined as CEO back in 2015, and obviously your role today is to drive the company forward. And what I read about you, Jeremy, is that you've put a lot of work into the foundations of the business. So I guess take us through that in terms of the business side of things.
Sure. Well, I think one of the key opportunities we identified before Larry Kesselman intervened and acquired the league. So the league was previously owned by the 8 teams in equal proportions. And Larry at the time was the owner of one of those teams, Melbourne United. And the other teams approached him and asked if he would be interested in acquiring a majority interest in the league. And at that time, I was a lawyer, a partner of a law firm, and Larry happened to be a client of mine. And we sort of kicked this idea around for a little while. It was a very short time because we were actually very aligned in terms of what we identified as the opportunity for this sport. The first one was, as I said earlier, we knew what success looked like and that this was basketball. This is not a niche sport that people don't understand. It's a sport that people the world over love and enjoy and play. The second thing was we knew Australians enjoyed it, but the Australian product had never really expanded beyond its local borders. I guess you've got the New Zealand Breakers in the competition. There was once a team from Singapore in the competition, but no one had ever really said about a strategic plan for shouting it from the rafters that Australia is one of the best basketball countries in the world.
Sure.
And where we do enter a fully fledged team in world competition, we're generally around 4th or 5th best in the world at a national level. And I think from a league perspective, we're in the top 5 or 6 leagues in the world.
Sure.
We're definitely the strongest league in Asia. Asia is the biggest basketball economy in the world, and we've got China right there on our doorstep, which is the biggest basketball market in terms of a single country of any country in the world.
Sure. So the statistics are good, obviously, but looking at it from a business perspective, you've mentioned Larry. Now, Larry is an entrepreneur per se, or he's known as an entrepreneur. What relevance does entrepreneurship actually have in a sports league, in a sports organisation?
Huge amounts. I guess every company, regardless of industry, has its own personality and its own life cycle. And the leader or the entrepreneur within that business, I guess, is the brain that can be supplanted into that organisation from time to time. And different organisations need different leaders depending on where they are in that life cycle.
Sure.
What we needed and what the NBL needed when Larry and I came on board, I guess, was leadership to take the sport out of its comfort zone, to push boundaries, to be innovative. And I guess at that time, the league was so broken that we were able to put it back together the way that it should operate. We were able to some extent, walk away from the past and say, well, let's not worry too much about how it was. If we were starting from scratch, how should it be? And then have the confidence to be able to implement that strategy. Because we're now a privately owned league, we have a mandate to be able to take risk, to be able to invest in innovation, to be bold in our decision making and take others in the organisation on that journey with us. And I think that's what entrepreneurship really required, or that's the kind of entrepreneurship that this organisation required at the time, was bold leadership to go places where the sport hadn't been before.
And these terms you're referring to, as in risk-taking and innovation and stepping out of the comfort zone and opportunity, yes, they're conventional terms in the business world, and it's great to see them in this particular sphere. Coming back to the word sustainable business, because that's really the essence and focus of the discussion today. What is firstly your definition of a sustainable business, and then how is that applied into your organisation?
I think the idea of sustainability has changed a lot in recent years. It used to be about having cash flow and a balance sheet that meant that you could keep the doors open and the lights on. Sustainability, though, now is so much more than that. It's about being robust and being able to foresee challenges long before they arise, and having the mechanisms in place to deal with them, again, long before those challenges arise. It's about thinking about alternative revenue streams to underwrite those times when perhaps your core revenue stream is not as strong as it could be. And it's about being resilient in the face of challenge and risk, and having applied the forethought to overcoming those risks.
Right.
And for us, a lot of those risks are around the competitive nature of the sporting market here in Australia and in a global sense.
Sure.
It's a very congested market. There's very limited sponsorship dollars. There's very limited TV rights once you take AFL, NRL out of the picture. And so we've had to be investing in the sustainability of the business by ensuring that our business model is more than just another sporting league.
Sure.
And we're as much a media company, a venture capital company, and a tech company as we are a sporting company.
Sure, and I'm guessing too that there's a lot of disruption going on in your marketplace at the same time in order to be competitive and so forth. So on that sort of note, how do you disrupt a sports league?
I guess one of the first things that we did was at the end of our first year in partnership with Fox Sports, and Fox Sports were an absolutely fundamental part of bringing the sport of basketball back to the mainstream in Australia. At the end of that first year, we sat down and decided that it was in our own interest to basically own all of our own production and all of the creative control around our sport, and provide that content still to Fox Sports because they're the most credible sports broadcaster in the country. But in terms of how we deal with our commercial sponsors, who are going to be our main source of revenue for the time being until the media rights fee market evolves, we needed to find a new way of delivering value to our investors, i.e. our corporate partners. And that way was, well, providing them with a single point of contact to be able to own the sport. Whether it's the billboards at the beginning of our broadcast, TV commercials during the broadcast, integrated assets during the game, digital media, across all of our social highlights, across our community programs. No matter what it is, they know that they only have to come and talk to one person and that we can make their business objectives come true.
So it's more than just the game, isn't it? There's so much more behind the scenes, behind the curtain. And in terms of TV per se, obviously Fox Sports is the whole guts of it, but in terms of TV, how important is that for any sports league?
It's fundamental at the end of the day. You've got to have your sport watched by as many people as possible if you're going to have any chance of getting the revenue on board to make that sport sustainable.
Sure.
And TV is not the be-all and end-all, because that industry is being disrupted more than just about any other at the moment.
Sure.
And we will see over the next 5 years, I think, a pretty significant evolution of how people consume live sport. There's already been a really obvious and significant shift to digital platforms. We saw a huge amount of viewership of basketball on digital platforms during the Olympics. And that for us was a really interesting signpost, and that's, I guess, what made us realise that we had to invest now in our own content. We had to own our own digital platform, so you can now watch every game live on NBL TV, our own proprietary digital platform, anywhere in the world. And I think we've been really innovative and disruptive in that sense.
Great.
But we're probably 5 years ahead of the wave. And that's not ideally where you want to be. That sounds great that you're ahead of the pack, but you don't want to be 5 years behind the wave, and you don't really want to be 5 years ahead of it, because we've got to withstand, I guess, that 5 years until the wave catches up with us.
Sure.
And people start consuming even more of their sport.
In terms
digitally.
of the global market, I know China is a big focus for you looking ahead. How important is China as far as your brand exposure and your brand position across the globe?
China's really important. It's really important to any basketball market if they're going to make the most of that market. And it's so close to us, and we have such a strong relationship with China on many fronts, not just basketball, not just sport, but as a trade partner, in terms of proximity, government affairs. There are so many aspects of our daily life that are not reliant on China, but interwoven with China. As I said, when Larry and I first came together, we identified China as a very significant opportunity. Why? Because they're constantly striving to improve the quality of their national team, and they need their biggest rival in the region to help them do that. Sure. Rivalries are a really important thing in sport. They're a really important thing in business.
Yep.
And they are the fuel for continuous improvement. So we stand ready as a really willing and able partner to Chinese basketball, and I know that they would say the same of Australian basketball. We're forging some great relationships.
Sure.
And it's not the key to our sustainability, but it will determine the extent of our success.
So I'm guessing China, being your potential partner, will be there to increase your competitive position against other major rivals around the world. And obviously,
Absolutely.
if we look at the US teams and the US team and Serbia and Spain and so forth, obviously there's obviously a lot of thought there that goes behind how do you become more competitive.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. One of the real distinct advantages that we have as compared to, say, the US, Serbia or Spain and some of the global powerhouses of basketball, as you've identified, but where we think we're quite unique is that we fill a niche gap for a Chinese basketball consumer between the CBA, their local league, and the NBA, which is their, I guess, everyone's aspirational league. But they're at polar ends. The CBA is not yet of the quality, I guess, as a domestic league that the NBL is. The TV product, the entertainment product isn't as evolved as it is in say, Western markets. But it's got a lot of local content in terms of local players, and it's on at the prime time of day at 7:30 p.m. Take the NBA, on the other hand, fantastic quality of basketball, fantastic TV product, but it's on at completely the wrong time of day to watch live sport in China, and there are no Chinese players in the competition, so to speak. And Yao Ming changed all of that for a period there, and he was a large reason for the huge growth of basketball in China. But now without Chinese participation, there's, I guess, less incentive for them to tune in at 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning to watch a live game, whereas we hope to sit right in the middle. We have a fantastic TV product. We have a fantastic quality league. We're on 2 hours usually before the primetime CBA game each day. So our content feeds directly into their content. And we hope to have more and more developing talent coming not just out of China, but from all around Asia coming to compete in our league, and that started last season, and you'll continue to see that evolve in this coming season.
So currently you have 8 teams, 7 in Australia, 1 in New Zealand. When will the ninth one come along?
When? Look, I hope in the not too distant future. It won't be this coming season. Yep. Hopefully the season after that. And then we always field questions as to where that team will come from. Is there room for domestic expansion? Will we be allowed to expand internationally? Of course, we're governed by FIBA, as are most basketball competitions in the world. So it's a process that we're going through in terms of making sure that all stakeholders are comfortable with the approach that we're taking to our expansion. But it's also, like any business, you've got to be careful to grow sustainably. There's only so many players in Australia who are capable of playing professional basketball at the highest level. So if you grow to too many teams too quickly, the quality of the competition will actually be diluted. Sure. And of course, it's a congested market in terms of sponsors. So
I'm sure the fans are waiting anxiously for this team to come along soon. In terms of the community, I know that your organisation does engage in a lot of community work. Can you sort of describe that in a bit more detail?
Sure. Like any sporting organisation, I guess our players need to be role models to those kids who follow them in the community. It's really important that we're visible from, I guess, a social responsibility point of view, but also from a commercial point of view. It's no mistake that corporate partners tie themselves to organisations that represent themselves well in the community. But our obligation goes beyond just that of our commercial partners. We actually want to play a role in improving society and improving our communities. Basketball is such a huge participation sport because of the fact that it spans almost all age groups. It spans all genders. It spans all aspects of multicultural and ethnicity because it's played in more than 270 countries around the world. So we think that we can really have an impact greater than a lot of other sports, and so we need to step up to the challenge. We need to do more than we're doing at present, and our greater community programs will be unveiled in the next 12 months.
And how do you sort of guarantee the authenticity behind, the community work that your league engages in?
Guaranteeing authenticity is I guess, a challenge. You don't want, I guess, those cynics in the public saying, well, they're only in it to generate commercial dollars. As I said, it's an important part of our commercial partnership strategy, but as I said, we do want to be there to do good. And the only way to guarantee authenticity or to demonstrate authenticity is by actually demonstrating that you are doing some good, that you're not just there paying lip service. Our game is all about being inclusive, and so we want to take the game to as many people as we can to show them that they can participate and that playing basketball will help them in their everyday life. It makes people more resilient. It makes people better team members. It gives people confidence because everyone can play basketball.
Great. In terms of the sustainability side of social media, how does social media actually assist in ensuring that your company is sustainable? Like, where does that fit in?
Social media is a really important aspect of our business. I guess part of the challenge of basketball, and it's a double-edged sword, is that we appeal to such a wide diaspora of people, as I said, all age groups, all genders, all ethnicities. So you have to be very careful about how you talk to people and engage with them in the appropriate way. Now, we have, I guess, mainstream TV and digital products for people just to consume the sport, but then we have, and that's probably at the older end of the age spectrum in terms of the traditional way of consuming sport. Our younger generation consume most of their sport through social media and in highlights, and that has a completely different tone of voice. And in that regard, the NBL has, I guess, developed its own pretty unique personality, I think, from a social media perspective. So we've invested very heavily in empowering our fans to lead the dialogue about the NBL. So we're not protective of our content in that regard. Quite the opposite. We're investing now in ways to make our content available to the public so that they can share it and they can start the dialogue, because that is a much more authentic dialogue than us just telling people things about our sport on social media.
Sure. In terms of the future landscape of basketball per se, what do you envisage or would like to envisage over the next 15, 20 years?
Yeah, I guess it's no secret that the media environment is changing and evolving constantly at the moment. I think the way that we watch live sport will be dramatically different in 5 years to what it is now. And so I'm really looking forward to being a market leader in that space and making sure that we're setting ourselves apart from our competition here in Australia and globally. There's myriad ways which you can deliver content differently to people these days, and new platforms are arriving all the time. But I think that will be the most significant change in live sport in the next 5 years, is just how we consume it. And then the gamification of live sport is also really interesting. How do we engage our fans more in the product while they're consuming and watching it? There's been a number of different ways that different sporting leagues all around the world have tried. We've got our own ideas, which we'll be unveiling soon, but I think that will be a really exciting area in the next 5 to 10 years.
And is there any hope or perhaps a reality that Australia will be number one internationally in the future?
That's a pretty significant aspiration given just how far ahead the US is, I think, of the rest of the market at the moment.
Yep.
There's a population base there that's pretty significant.
We need to disrupt that.
We do. There's a huge corporate sponsorship base there that's making sure that they stay at the top of their game. But I'll tell you what, we'll do everything we can to give them a red hot shake.
Well, as entrepreneurs, we're ambitious, and that's what we need to do. So
that's exactly
it's a pleasure speaking to you, Jeremy.
Thank you very much, Federico.
Thanks for your time.
Enjoyed it very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.